The nation's highest court using a Michigan case to decide same-sex marriage for the entire nation, and today they're going to hear arguments from both sides.
At the center of the debate is a Michigan lesbian couple who sued the state because they could not jointly adopt their children without getting married, a union Michigan law prohibits.
Well, in just hours, Brian Sterling will be inside the Supreme Court for those arguments. He'll be hearing it for himself. But first, he's live on Daybreak with a legal perspective on all this. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, Brett and Emily. Yes, the sun is now up here in Washington, D.C., and the crowds are out here at the U.S. Supreme Court. And we're kind of locked down here, but if you look around the entire block of where the building is here in Washington, D.C., there is a huge crowd that is gathered to hear these historic arguments. It's a simple constitutional question. Despite all the hoopla that's happening outside the court, inside the courtroom, it basically comes down to a couple of issues. Equal protection under the law. Can states ban same-sex marriages? And if a same-sex marriage is legal in one state, does the other state that doesn't recognize it have to recognize it? So a couple of questions the justices will ultimately have to decide on. We want to bring in our legal analyst joining us live back at the studio in Grand Rapids, Curt Benson with Cooley Law. Curt, thanks for your time. What will you be paying attention to today? Who will you be listening to on the high court?
Well, the idea being usually it's Justice Kennedy in these cases are going to be the swing vote, right? We already have it staked out when they decided the famous United States versus Windsor case with Justice Kennedy writing for the majority. He's the one who struck down parts of the Defense of Marriage Act, the federal law, deeming it unconstitutional, and he wrote the opinion. So I think Justice Kennedy is the key vote here, and that's the one people will be looking at.
You know, Curt, 37 of 50 states now permit gay marriage, many because of the judicial orders. Is it unlikely that the high court would go against that trend?
Well, I think the smart money is on the court striking down as unconstitutional bans against same-sex marriage. And I say that because Kennedy sent a lot of signals when he wrote that opinion. The Windsor decision is not a model of clarity, let me tell you that. It was a very jumbled opinion, a very difficult opinion to read, and a lot of people suspect he wrote it in such a way to give the court maximum flexibility when this case comes along. So Windsor will be cited as precedent, and you can read a lot into Windsor, and it's going to give Kennedy, again, who authored the opinion, the freedom, I think, to steer the court into the direction along with the way the direction of the country is going, which is in favor of same-sex marriage.
John Bursch, who's going to be arguing on behalf of Attorney General Bill Schuette, he's already indicated that he wants to attack this from two different areas. He wants to say that the vote of the people should stand because the voters did approve a ban on same-sex marriage in the state of Michigan, and that the sanctity of male-female relationships and as it relates to child rearing should also be considered in this. Talk about the validity, I guess, of those arguments. Is it something that the court will pay attention to?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, generally speaking, you know, we live in a representative democracy, and the people's will normally takes precedent. Of course, obviously, if the people's will conflicts with the Constitution of the United States, the people's will gives way to the Constitution. And there have been many situations where people have voted in favor of something where the courts later said, doesn't matter what the majority thinks, it violates the Constitution. But Mr. Burch's argument is well taken. He's saying, look, who decides this? You know, 9 lawyers in robes, or do the people of the state of Michigan? So I think he's got a valid argument. Also, one of the problems, and I think one of the things that the courts are looking at, is the argument in favor of traditional marriage and opposed to same-sex marriage is grounded primarily in both religion and history. And to the eyes of the court, it's like, yeah, that's important as far as the culture of the country, but it doesn't constitute a reason to discriminate against same-sex people simply because that's our religious beliefs, that's our tradition, that's our that's how our culture is grounded. You need something a little more specific. And people who oppose same-sex marriage thus far have been unable to convince the courts that there's any psychological studies or any studies whatsoever to suggest that children are somehow harmed being raised by a same-sex couple as opposed to a heterosexual couple.
How states are dealing with it and dealing with it here.
Curt Benson, we always appreciate your legal analysis. I know that you'll be listening in when they release the audio transcripts later today, and we'll be checking back in with you on later editions of 24 Hour News 8. Curt Benson with Cooley Law, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're very welcome.
So that's going to, thank you, Curt. And so that's going to do it here for now for the Supreme Court. Again, the oral arguments get underway at 10 o'clock. They are going to break it down into 2 chunks, a total of 2.5 hours of arguments. And then the groups will assemble here on the steps behind me, and they'll give their opinion on which way they thought the case went. And again, a June decision is expected from the High Court. So I'll send it back to you guys, reporting live from Washington. Brian Sterling, back to you, Brett and Emily.
All right, thank you so much, Brian. Really interesting how such an important topic comes down to 2.5 hours of talking, basically. Well, the road to the Supreme Court for same-sex marriage here in Michigan goes back more than 10 years. It was in 2004 that Michigan voted to ban gay marriage. In 2012, a lawsuit was filed challenging that ban. We have this full breakdown for you online, including an interactive map showing gay marriage laws all across the country.
State of